Elias, everyone hear me okay? Elias, thank you very much for the introduction. I have the wonderful privilege of sharing the stage with my colleague and counterpart from the Center of Drug Evaluation and Research, Kristina Lauritsen. We are both very honored to have the opportunity to give the plenary presentation, which we've titled, Elias has already mentioned, Navigating the World of Combination Products. So with that, let's jump in. So before we begin our world tour, and since we're morning, starting things off, easy questions for the audience. First question, and I want to see a show of hands if possible. Who has flown on an airplane before? I was going to ask you what the definition of a combination product was, but I thought this would be much easier. So, okay, hands down. For everyone online, pretty much everyone in the room raised their hand, as expected. Next question. Who have found themselves on this list, the standby list, when looking to fly? Raise your hands, please. Okay, much fewer. For those online, maybe 5% of the room at most. So, truth be told, I experienced this situation with my family just over a month ago for the first time, and flying probably over 30 years. And just so you know, full disclosure, my family is my wife and a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, and we were traveling to see grandparents. So it ended up being a 24 to 36 hour ordeal. We missed our flight due to my wife's desire to have us run through the airport and not wait in lines to get on the airplane. But long and short, we did miss our flight. And after about 24, 36 hours, flying to another city and approximately 4 gate checks where the flights were oversold, so we were unable to get on the flight, we ultimately made it to our destination, and my children were able to see their grandparents, so everything was okay. However, so the question from you probably is, why is this individual from CDRH talking to me about the trials and tribulations with his children and wife? So during that 24-hour period, I actually came to realize that the experiences that I often will have in the current role that I have in the FDA with combination products is not too dissimilar, in that we may be accustomed, if you're a drug manufacturer or a device manufacturer, you're used to a certain pathway and a number of steps and processes associated with bringing your, say, device or drug to the market. However, when you have a combination product, you now are exposed to considerations and attributes and questions and concerns that you had neither contemplated or you maybe weren't adept to addressing per se. That was my exact situation when I was learning about standby and trying to explain that to a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old of why we're not getting on the plane, even though we're in the right place at the right time and our name is on the board suggesting that we should be on this plane. So long and short, the agency has looked to develop organizations and positions to hopefully make your experience more like the previous picture, where you're looking out the window and seeing blue skies on the horizon and not necessarily at the airport in front of a monitor, not sure exactly what the next steps are. So with that in mind, describe who we are, Kristy and myself. So again, we're the jurisdiction officers for the respective groups, and part of our duties is addressing inquiries both internally and externally. And just so if you have any questions either now or later and you'd like to get a hold of us, here's our contact information. In addition to individuals like ourselves, the agency has created the Office of Combination Products. They're also there to help facilitate the review and regulation of combination products. So a little more clarity on what we do. We are center focal points for combination product questions and issues, both internally and externally. And just to make clear, and I didn't necessarily address in the previous slide, we're often confused and thought to be with this Office of Combination Products. We, Kristy and myself, are not with the Office of Combination Products, though we deal with them on a daily, possibly hourly basis. We represent our respective centers. Again, myself in Center for Device and Radiological Health, and Kristina Lauritsen with Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. In our role and our interactions with the Office of Combination Products, we provide recommendations to OTP on behalf of our centers. For example, if you've ever experienced a request for designation and you're trying to figure out what your product is it a combination product, is it a drug, is it a device, where do you need to go? we will provide recommendations on behalf of our centers to the Office of Combination Product in those roles. And this goes beyond just product-specific issues and submissions, but also pertains to policies associated with those. So again, we will often represent, amongst others from the centers, we will often be a point representing our center on combination product jurisdiction policies. So that's not all. We have more, and we do more. Again, everything revolves around OCP. We work with OCP intimately when we're looking at developing guidance documents and regulations that may not only pertain to our products in our center, but then also may have impact on products in other centers. And along those lines, there's many working groups that we participate in, and we will represent center-level positions in those. And as I mentioned earlier, we respond to both internal and external inquiries, and we see plenty of those. And ultimately, the goal is to help both internal and external staff get clarity on regulatory pathways and ultimately the necessities for those pathways. So now that you have a better appreciation of us, quick overview of what we're going to take you down in approximately the next hour. So first stop in our journey will be identifying combination products and understanding how it's determined where your product resides, whether it be Center for Devices or Center for Drugs. We'll then look to set sail for, once that's been elucidated and determined, we'll look to set sail and look at early interactions and how those are dealt with within the respective centers. We'll take on the cliff of clinical trials, and after that skill set, we will conquer the mountain of manufacturing. After this, we will set sail to undertake pre-market submissions, and ultimately, the end goal of blissfully sailing off to post-market paradise. So the learning objectives of today. First and foremost, is this presentation applicable to you? We hope you'll be able to identify what and what is not a combination product after this short time we have with you. If not, please feel free to reach out to us. Ultimately, also describe, we intend to describe, and hopefully you understand, the agency's assignment of combination products. And then during the process and overview of our journey, we will compare and contrast the regulatory paradigms and the different resources at the respective centers. And also, so you recognize review considerations, so you don't have time staring at the standby list, and you have a better understanding of what you would need to bring your product, your combination product, to market. And then ultimately, the goal of understanding best practices going forward.
I'm going to get us started on our journey today. The first place to start is always at the very beginning. In order to figure out where it is that you want to go, you need to know where you're starting from, what you are, what product you're developing. And so that's the classification piece where you're identifying whether you're a drug, a device, a biologic, or a combination product. And so we first look to the statute to identify a device, a drug, or a biologic based on the statutory definitions of those. But then in creating a combination product, what's happening is that two or more different articles are being combined together to create a new product. So you can combine them in multiple different ways, but it's basically a drug and a device, device biologic, or drug device biologic in some rare occasions as well. And there are essentially three types of combination products that exist. They can be physically or chemically combined into a single entity. This is something like a drug-eluting stent. It can also be co-packaged or put together into a kit. A really basic example is just a first aid kit. It's full of bandages that are very simple devices. You might have some Neosporin or some iodine swabs in there that are drugs. When you put all those together, that is a combination product because you have both drugs and devices together in a single kit. And then there's another type of combination product that we see a little bit less often. And these are those that are sold separately, but they are labeled specifically for use with each other. And the most common example of those are things like the photoactivated drugs with the laser light source that is sold separately from the photoactivated drug that is used to provide the therapy. Now, just as important as recognizing what a combination product is recognizing what is not a combination product. And two drugs combined together This is not a combination product. This is a fixed dose drug combination, not a combination product. Same with combining two devices together in a kit, two biologics. And if you want to combine a food with a drug, a device, or a biologic, such as if you are trying to create some new hangover therapy where you're co-packaging your beer and some new hangover drug, you've got some regulatory issues to consider here, but you're still not a combination product. And likewise, cosmetics can also be combined with drugs in different ways. And so your dandruff medicated shampoo is a cosmetic, but it's also not a combination product. So once you've identified what type of product you have, the next step on your journey to figure out where it is that you're going to go is the assignment question. So this is the, where do I go? What do I do now that I know what I have? So I'm going to step back for a second and talk a little bit more about the Office of Combination Products. James mentioned this already, but the Office of Combination Products sits in the, our slides are a little bit wonky. It didn't look that way on our screen. Anyway, the Office of Combination Products sits within the Office of the Commissioner. They sit separately from where James and I sit, which is within our respective centers. I'm also showing CBER up here. CBER is not part of this SBIA conference, but we do work with our sister center for biologics quite frequently as well. And I also want to mention that the three of us in each of the centers represent a team that works with the Office of Combination Products in determining what a product is, where it has the primary jurisdiction. So OCP might be the central focal point for combination product issues, and they have broad oversight responsibilities over the regulatory life cycle of those. But then within our respective centers, we are working diligently on behalf of our centers to work with OCP on those combination products. So moving on to assignment, it's really easy to remember a drug is assigned based on its classification of a drug to the Center for Drugs. Makes a lot of sense, right? Devices go to the Center for Devices. Biological products can go to one of two centers depending on what they are. And that does bring me to the exceptions that I want to mention because unfortunately we're the government, so there's always an exception, even though there's lots of rules. And two of those exceptions are that devices that create a biological product at the point of care, they're regulated as devices, but they are assigned to the Center for Biologics for that regulation. And these might be things that create, for example, a stem cell therapy, because the ultimate product that's being created is that cellular therapeutic product. And then there are a variety of biological products, such as therapeutic proteins and antibodies, that are still classified as biological products because they meet that statutory biological product definition, but they are assigned to CDER. So what about combination products? Well, I know you all went to bed last night reading the statute, so you have this very clearly in your mind exactly what that says about where a combination product goes. And so if you'll pull that out, you'll remember that combination products get assigned based on their primary mode of action. And this is the primary therapeutic intent of the product. So anything that is a primary therapeutic action of a drug gets assigned to CDER, a device assigned to CDRH. And if it's a biological product providing that primary mode of action, it goes to either CDER or to CBER, and that's dependent, again, on that exception that I mentioned earlier as to what type of biological product it is. So let's just walk through two examples. Drug-eluting stent. The primary mode of action is the stent opening the artery. This is provided by the device. Secondary mode of action is that of the drug that's eluting off the stent that is preventing inflammation and restenosis. On the other hand, we have a drug-eluting disc. The primary mode of action here is being provided by the chemotherapy for treating a brain tumor. And the device is providing a secondary mode of action by delivering the drug. So we have two drug-eluting devices, but based on the primary mode of action, the drug-eluting stent is assigned to the Center for Devices, and the drug-eluting disc is assigned to the Center for Drugs. So those are the easy cases. What happens when PMOA is hard to identify? Sometimes you're really early in development. You have potentially two therapeutic products that you don't know which one is providing the primary mode of action. And sometimes there are two or more completely different modes of action, and neither of them can be said to be subordinate to the other. So, in those cases, the agency uses what we call the assignment algorithm. And this is described in the regulations, but if we are unable to determine primary mode of action. So if you can determine primary mode of action, we don't even get into this. But if you can't determine primary mode of action, then we first consider consistency. Have we seen a similar product before? Do we have a product that already has this type of device and this type of drug combined together for this indications for use? If yes, then we will assign it consistent with that other product to the center that regulates it so that it is getting a consistent regulatory scheme for that product. However, if the first does not apply, if this is a novel product that we have never seen before, it's being combined in a way that we haven't seen before, we then have to determine which center will review that product. And so in that case, we will look at what the constituent parts of the product are. We'll look at the device constituent. We'll look at the drug constituent. We'll look at how they're combined together. And we'll try and determine which center has the most expertise related to the most significant safety and effectiveness questions of the product. So let me walk you through an example of that. A contact lens is coated with a glaucoma drug. The device mode of action is that of the contact lens to correct vision. The drug mode of action is that to treat the glaucoma. Here, they have independent modes of action. The device can achieve its intended effect of vision correction without the drug. The drug can achieve its therapeutic effect of treating glaucoma without the device, but combining the two together allows a patient to receive both treatments in one way. So we can't determine primary mode of action. We have two therapeutic independent modes of action. When we look at the algorithm, first is tier 1. If we have never seen a contact lens coated with a glaucoma drug before, we move to the second tier of the algorithm, and we look at the most significant safety and effectiveness questions. And in this type of example, we consider the questions related to the vision correcting contact lens to be a little bit more routine than those related to the clinical performance and characterization of the drug in this case. And so here, the product is assigned to CDER. Now, notwithstanding the assignment, we will still be consulting with our colleagues in the Center for Devices, and we'll talk a little bit about the Intercenter consult process later on. So if you are creating a combination product, how do you get that classification? How do you determine that you have a drug device or a device biologic? And how do you get that jurisdiction assignment? We're going to walk through a couple of ways that you can go about doing that. The first is always to start with the Office of Combination Products if you'd like to do that. They offer informal advice on a regular basis. Their email address is up here. It's best to contact them about simple issues, uncertainty, or process concerns, and also to determine if you even need a pre-RFD or an RFD. Most combination products actually don't need a jurisdiction designation. Most combination products are readily understandable to be a lead center of one versus the other. Drug-eluting stents, we already know they're going to go to CDRH because they've been reviewing them for years. Pre-filled syringe, that's a really simple combination product. The device is providing no therapeutic effect. It's the drug that's inside that pre-filled syringe that's providing the therapy. You don't need an RFD or a pre-RFD in those situations. But if you have something that we haven't seen before, that we're not sure what to do with, or there's just some uncertainty, then there's the pre-request for designation or the request for designation process. There's guidance available on both of them. The pre-RFD is probably the most common option that is used by sponsors, and that gives you an informal determination from the Office of Combination Products in consult with the centers to what we think the primary mode of action is of your combination product and which center is going to be responsible for the review. In certain cases, you may need a formal binding determination from the agency, and that can come through the request for designation process. There's a 60-day review clock associated with that, and it's really best used for complex issues or dispute or uncertainty. The requirements for that are laid out in the regulations. So when do you want to submit an RFD or a pre-RFD? Again, most combination products actually don't need one. So if you're not sure, start with an informal inquiry. Start with an informal inquiry to OCP, or if you're already pretty sure that you're going to be working with CDER or CDRH, start with an informal inquiry to one of us. We can answer that question. And as James mentioned, we talk to OCP, if not hourly, if not daily, hourly. So we're in constant contact with them. So a question that comes to them or comes to us, eventually we all talk about it. The other thing that's really important is that you submit your RFD or your pre-RFD before you make any submission to the agency. And the reason why that's important is that if there is uncertainty about which center is going to be the lead center for your product, and you send in your submission, and the reviewers take a look at it and say, we don't think this belongs here, we think this belongs somewhere else, we're actually going to put that submission on hold. We're going to stay the review clock for that submission while we work out jurisdiction. And so it's to your benefit to be sure of your jurisdiction before you make a submission so that you don't get waylaid once you've already put together your package in the format for one center, only to find out that you need to go to another center and reformat your submission package in a different way. So what do you get if you submit a pre-RFD or an RFD to the Office of Combination Products? This is an example of a formal decision letter. The informal decisions that you get from OCP are actually very similar. They just don't come on letterhead, they come by email. And what OCP will give you is the classification. Again, that's the what is it? Is it a drug? Is it a device? Is it a biologic? Or is it a combination? And they'll provide the rationale. And that rationale will be based on the reviews that they do independently, as well as the information that the centers give them on what that product is. Then they will also provide you the assignment. This is which center that product is going to be reviewed by, and they'll provide the rationale for that assignment as well. Did they make that determination based on primary mode of action, and how did that information feed into it, or is it based on the algorithm that I talked about? And again, all of that information is based on the reviews that the subject matter experts in the centers feed up to the Office of Combination Products, as well as their own independent review. So now that you know what your product is, and you know where you're going to go with it, it's time to start interacting with the centers and to figure out what all the additional requirements might be to get you to that post-market paradise we talked about. And so this is the point in the talk where James and I are going to compare and contrast the different paradigms that the centers have. And so we're going to be tossing this back and forth with each other. Try not to get whiplash. We'll try to take it slowly so you can, see how we do things differently. The most important thing to remember as we walk through this, though, is that the processes might be different working with the different centers, but the factors that we're considering is about the combination product as a whole. And so we're constantly working together on the data and the information needed. It's just the support of those processes that tends to be a little different.
So if you have a combination product that is ultimately assigned to the Center for Device and Radiological Health, and you are looking to engage early with the center, there are what we refer to as a Q submission program. And this entails various options, and again, it's sort of contingent upon where you are in your developmental process. Ultimately, as Kristy mentioned, we're looking to compare and contrast. So this is just a flavor of what you will be hearing later in the respective tracks, or if not in the tracks, there's guidance documents upon guidance documents that clarify much of this. So in this particular case, for the Q submission program, CDRH actually finalized guidance this current month, we're still in the month of May, and updated to address sort of the current state of affairs. So I'm not going to go through this table in totality, but again, it's just to give you a flavor and the different options in front of you. For example, the first in the table, the pre-submission. This is the most common. This is when you're soliciting feedback on a question or a specific set of questions, and you're looking to get clarity on what you need to do to get your product from point A to point B. However, sometimes we have firms that are much earlier than that. They don't have specific comments, but they have an extremely novel technology, and they want to familiarize FDA staff with their product, or maybe they have a platform technology, something along those lines. You just want to have an opportunity to get this in front of potential reviewers and FDA staff. That may be more appropriate under an informational meeting. Again, this is more of a listening role on the agency side and an opportunity for you to give more of a show and tell and say, hey, here's what we have. At the same time, maybe you've already begun to interact with the agency. You've submitted, again, if you're in CDRH, you submitted a 510K, de novo, or a PMA, and you've received feedback that asks for a list of questions or has a list of deficiencies, and we're requesting data from you. And you're not exactly sure what we're asking from you. Instead of trying to take that on and go down a path that may not be productive for either you or the agency, a submission issue request may be appropriate. Again, this is an opportunity to request clarity, propose sort of high level how you intend to address the issue identified by the agency, and have a meeting if desired, or if you just want written feedback, that is also a possibility. Again, those are probably the three most common, and if you'd like more information on the other avenues, again, the guidance was recently updated, or I'm happy to talk after that. Thank you.
Next up, I'll talk about the CDER, your early interaction and feedback processes that exist. They are very similar to what CDRH has to offer, but there is the added complexity that they differ based on what type of user fee program you're coming in under with CDER. And so CDRH is lucky that they have a single user fee program. We happen to have three that we operate under within CDER. So there's the prescription drug user fee program, the biosimilar user fees, and then the generic drug user fees. And each of those programs has different meeting types within those, depending on if you are developing a generic drug, a biosimilar, or a standard novel drug or novel biologic for the first time. And any one of those can also be a combination product. So within any of those, if you're creating a combination product that falls within that type of user fee program, you're going to be coming in under one of those meeting types. By and far, though, the most common that we see is those that come in under the PDUFA program. And by far the most common type of combination product meetings are the type B meetings. These are the pre-IND meetings. These are the meetings that you might have before beginning your initial clinical study. Or a type C meeting is also extremely common for combination products within CDER. And so these are the meeting types that allow you to get feedback on various types of questions related to your combination product development. And essentially the meeting types within the biosimilar are very similar. They're just called something a little different. Instead of type A, B, and C, we've got BPD type 1, 2, 3, and 4. And there's a session, I don't recall if it's later today or tomorrow in the drug track, that's going to talk more about the interactions that you can get under the pre-submission processes within CDER. And then the last I'll touch on just briefly is the generic drugs. There is a mechanism for if you're creating a complex generic drug combination product to come in and have a meeting with the agency on those. But also a very common way to get feedback on that generic drug, if you have simple or single questions about that for a combination product, is to submit under the controlled correspondence mechanism, which is not a meeting, but a way of getting your question answered for your combination product. And there are guidances available on each of these that will tell you more explicitly what it is you need to provide in order to get that type of feedback that you're looking for. There we go. Sorry. All right. So once you have figured out, and come in and met with the agency and gotten the feedback that you need on either your preclinical development or your plans for your clinical trials, we're going to move on and start climbing that clinical studies cliff, because that's what you need to get over in order to finally get your product to market.
So in CDRH, the clinical study is referred to investigational device exemption, or an IDE, and the procedures and regulations associated with conducting an IDE are specified under 21 CFR 812. Generally speaking, depending on the submission type, IDEs, clinical studies, are commonplace for PMA applications, frequent for de novos, and a little less regular for 510Ks. And the general paradigm that is sort of for the clinical studies within CDRH are you have a feasibility study. This may be early feasibility or a traditional feasibility study. These usually aren't statistically powered. They're more sort of looking at preliminary safety and effectiveness considerations and looking to inform a future, more powered pivotal study, but it's ultimately sort of part of the development and looking to fine-tune your device before you take it into the larger study. And again, the pivotal study then is the more statistically powered, which is ultimately most of the evidence in that is supporting the reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness. There are other avenues or other examples of clinical studies, And these are referred to early access or expanded access, and I believe Maureen Dreher later on the device side will be speaking to more of the nuances in this aspect, but these may be emergency use, again, continued access, or compassionate use studies, again, trying to get innovative technology in the hands of patients.
So for CDER, we have a very similar paradigm. It's called the Investigational New Drug Application. And we use the IND, even though it just says drug in the name. This is also used for investigational biologics, so don't be confused by that. The procedures for how you conduct an IND are described in 21 CFR 312. Essentially, we really, operate in much the same way as CDER with regard to clinical studies. We tend to talk about them in different terms, in terms of phase 1, 2, 3, and 4, rather than early feasibility studies. But it's essentially doing the same thing, taking an early look at what it is that you need, and then expanding that into a well-controlled study for safety and effectiveness of the overall combination product. And I don't have it on this slide, but I should mention that we do have similar emergency use authorizations and expanded access types of programs within CDER as well. So the other thing that you need to consider before you can get your product to market is the manufacturing considerations that are associated with that. And you may know that CDRH has the quality system regulation, QSR, that is used for device manufacturing. And CDER for drugs has the current good manufacturing practices under 210 and 211, the GMPs. So if you're just making a device, then you follow the QSRs. If you're just making a drug, or you follow the GMPs. But if you are making a combination product, you actually need to follow both of them. Now, that might seem really burdensome, and certainly if you have a facility that is creating a combination product, you don't want to institute both a QSR system and a CGMP system. And luckily, you don't actually have to, because the agency recognized that would just not make a lot of sense to have both systems in one facility. 21 CFR Part 4 was codified 2013, and that actually describes how you can streamline that facility to have a system and still have the requirements associated with each constituent part applicable to that. And there's final guidance that has been put out, as well as some additional guidance about variations to the GMP requirements. But essentially what this does is it advises that you create a single system within your facility and then tack on a couple of additional things that might be important depending on what system you have. So if you are starting from a drug manufacturing facility, but now you're creating a combination product, you could operate under the drug GMPs, but you'll want to tack on a couple of different provisions from the device QSR systems to accommodate for that combination product, such as having a design history file and design controls associated with the device constituent part. And there are other things that you would add on, vice versa. And so the guidance and the rule essentially take you through what those requirements are. So once you have figured out your manufacturing and you've gotten through your clinical studies, we're going to drop anchor for a little while and talk about the pre-market submission process and how you're going to get ultimately that combination product cleared or approved and onto the market.
So before getting into the respective pathways within CDRH, again, I'm not going to go too far into this guide. Kim Permatteo, will be presenting on this soon. Devices, once assigned to CDRH, devices are classified based on their risk. And so generally speaking, a class 1 exempt device being a toothbrush, and class 3 being, in this case, a combination product, drug-eluting stent. And briefly, again, this is based on risk and the controls necessary to provide the reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness. Most class 1 devices are exempt from 510K, and some are even exempt from GMP obligations. Class 2 are the most prominent and the most commonplace, and these class 2 devices will typically require a 510K submission, and the controls necessary are understood to be the general controls and special controls. And then the highest risk are where the general controls are present, but special controls are deemed not to be adequate to mitigate the risks, so pre-market approval is ultimately required. So yeah, I was going to say, so the reason I wanted to bring that up is classification is a term that's also used previously, as Christy was bringing up, on classification as a combination product, as a drug, or as a device. And that wanted to make sure that is often confused. You can have device classification outside of combo product, drug, biologic device classification. So the general language associated with the respective pathways. So a 510K, a pre-market notification, that's not technically approved, that is cleared, and again, this is a vast majority of submissions seen in CDER, and that is determined to be substantially equivalent to the predicate device. Also, if there is not determined to be an appropriate predicate, but ultimately we believe that class 2 is appropriate for your product, you would go through a de novo request, and we, if determined to be appropriate, we would grant that request, and you would subsequently be in 510K after receiving a de novo. If, again, for the class 3, and the language for PMA is, that is actually referred to as an approved application. And also for a smaller subset of population, there's a humanitarian device exemption, or an HDE. And one note about an HDE is that you're not looking at reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness, your safety, and there's a demonstration of probable benefits. So you don't have quite the same effectiveness bar. And again, this is in a subpopulation, or less than 8,000 individuals in the U.S.
Oh, my turn. Sorry, I tried to jump ahead. The CDER application types, there's essentially the NDA, which is covered under Section 505 of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act, and that provides 3 different mechanisms for a drug to come to market. The 505B1 and the 505B2 are what I often think about as the new drug applications, because those are for the novel drugs that are coming in providing full reports of safety and effectiveness under the B1, or B2 type of NDA is one that also provides full report of safety and effectiveness, but some of the data can come from studies that are not conducted by the applicant. And then the 505J, that's essentially the generic application, or the ANDA, the abbreviated new drug application, and that's for the generic types of products. That pathway is available for drugs or for combination products where there's an identical ingredient, dosage form, use, route of administration, and all the labeling, et cetera, is going to be the same as one that has already been previously approved under the B1 or B2 NDA pathways. The BLA pathway is the biologic license application, and that provides a licensure pathway for biological products that come in under the Public Health Service Act. And similarly, the biosimilar is a way of getting a biosimilar biologic to market if there's already been an approved biologic under the BLA pathway. Just touching quickly on user fees, good news. There's no separate user fee paradigm for combination products. You essentially will submit a user fee based on the type of application that you are submitting. And so if you are submitting a combination product application to CDRH under the PMA, you're going to submit a PMA application fee. If you're submitting under the NDA to CDER, you're going to submit the NDA application fee. We're not going to charge you more, even though we're doing a review of both a drug and a device in those combination product applications. The one caveat to this, and that we're not going to touch on really a lot today, is that most combination products will come in under a single application, but there are some rare types of combination products where we have 2 applications, and such as when we have those photoactivated drugs, for example. You might have both a PMA for that laser light source and an NDA for the drug. And in those cases, because you're submitting 2 applications, you're actually paying 2 user fees for those. So, submitted your application. Got your clinical data reviewed. Got your manufacturing figured out. made it all the way through the pre-market submission and application and review process, and you are ready to market. You're ready to move on into the post-market phase of your product.
So from the device side of things, again, depending on the path, your post-market obligations depend on the pathway at which you were approved or cleared under. So for a PMA, if you're looking to make changes to your product, again, depending on the degree of change and what's entailed in that, if it's, for example, a change in the indications for use or a design change that ultimately requires new clinical data, this would typically be under a panel track supplement. Very more common supplement type for various other modifications. Again, your sort of more run-of-the-mill design changes, this would come in as a 180-day supplement. And then to a lesser degree, more minor changes that sort of can be reviewed more in a quote-unquote real-time. Obviously, it's called a real-time supplement where we look to interact if we have any concerns with the proposed change. And then stepping down further as you get into more of the run-of-the-mill, mundane manufacturing changes, this may be appropriate under a 30-day notice. And if we, in reviewing that, think there's a little more information that's needed and we're not quite comfortable until we see some data associated with that, we may convert it to a 135-day supplement. And then obviously there's changes that you don't even need to report to the agency or you don't need to get your approval for, and those can be often just documented in your annual reports. From a 510K perspective, and again, I'm going to kick this over to Angela DeMarco, who will be speaking to the different programs for 510K later on the device side of things. But you will have, if you're, again, making changes that could affect the indications for use or other aspects of safety and effectiveness of your product, a traditional 510K would be submitted if you have your device was cleared through 510K process. A special may be appropriate, special 510K, if summary level data is sufficient. And another criteria to this is that special is appropriate if you're not, if your change does not affect intended use and does not alter the fundamental scientific technology of your device. And again, Angela, I believe, speak more to this. And also, there's plenty of guidance on this. And then finally, there's also the abbreviated 510K option, which if there's sort of well-established special controls, recognized standards, guidance documents, this may be the appropriate mechanism by which you can submit the abbreviated and you can follow those very specific, detailed sort of roadmap for what's needed for your proposed change.
In much the same way as the PMA, the NDA has ability to submit changes through various mechanisms depending on the type of change that's being made. And so major changes usually require prior approval supplement, but more moderate changes can come in under something called a changes being affected or a CDE. Even more minor changes would be submitted to us through the annual reports.
And something of, I guess, a little bit more novel or new, but is post-market safety reporting obligations for a combination product. So while post-market safety reporting for both the drug and device have many similarities, they do each have their distinct requirements. And really what the PMSR rule looked to do, which was final, the final rule was issued in December of 2016. It was to ensure that there's consistency and completeness, and we're gathering all the information regarding the constituent parts of your combination product, but at the same time trying to mitigate some of the redundancy and the duplication that already inherently exists for your existing reporting obligations for the respective constituent parts. We issued a draft guidance in March of 2018 to to sort of articulate these nuances, and while it's still in draft, we have recently issued final guidance on the compliance policy, which has stipulated that we are delaying enforcement of a number of the provisions associated with this PMSR rule until July 2020 for those that report under FAERS and EMDR, which are drugs, devices, and biologics, and then till January of 2021 for those that report under FAERS
So we've sort of taken you on a very quick journey over how you get your combination product identified and get it over through to the marketing and post-market process. And then, we just did a really high, quick touches on all those different pieces. We do want to give a couple of quick touches on some various other things. What else is out there? What else are you thinking about or asking about for your combination products? So I'm going to touch really briefly on digital health, devices and drugs, and how we're seeing those things combined together. I'm going to mention combination product submission identification. I did tell you before that the centers consult all the time, so I want to just mention the Intercenter consult process to you. Touch on just a few general considerations for overall combination product development, and then mention that even though we've done all this work in this area of combination products and there's all this guidance and whatnot out there, we're still facing some regulatory challenges today. And so I'll just let you know we're still looking to work with you on working through all those areas. So quickly touching on digital health, this could be a whole talk given by CDRH on digital health, and so I'm not going to go into all of the details, but the most important thing to know in terms of how we look at digital health when it's combined with drugs is that not all software is a device. And what that means to you is that the use of software with a prescription drug doesn't necessarily make that a combination product. But we do sometimes have drugs that are combined with digital health in new and novel ways. And so there is a recent approval of a combination product with a pill that has an RFID sensor embedded in it, so that will track if patients have taken their medication. And because we're continuing to see these novel ways of combining software and using software with drugs, we in CDER established a digital health internal working group. But it's not a CDER working group. We established it, but we partnered with CDRH. James actually sits on that group with me as well, so that we are leveraging all of the information and all of the work that CDRH has already done with regards to digital health, and figuring out how to address those policies for software that's being used with drugs. This work group is there as a resource for the review teams, can answer some application-specific questions when it comes to them. And the goal of it all is really just to develop a risk-based approach to how we are looking at software that's being combined in novel ways and used in novel ways with prescription drugs, while still considering the existing policies and the work that CDRH has done on software and software as a medical device. And so when you think about it, there's just a continuum of ways in which software can be used with drugs, and we're looking at all of these different ways and thinking about the approaches that might be appropriate for those, from whether you're ingesting that sensor within a pill that's been embedded with that sensor, to whether you're just inputting information into a mobile app that is in no way connected with the drug that you've ingested. It's totally patient input. And so what we've done is propose a framework for how we might look at prescription drug use related software. It's a bit of a mouthful, and so we affectionately call it PDRS, which isn't really much better way to call it, but it works. And essentially what that is looking at is software that is disseminated by or on behalf of drug sponsors that's for use with one or more of their prescription drug products. It is not talking about third-party non-associated software. It's just those that are associated with the prescription drug or by or on behalf of the drug sponsor. And we really want to give drug sponsors the flexibility to develop and disseminate innovative software while still maintaining some of that appropriate oversight over the communications where they're looking at it as promotional labeling or not. And so this framework was published and we took a lot of comments on that. We're looking at the comments right now, and the end goal is hopefully to put out some guidance based on that feedback. And we're working very closely with our colleagues in the Center for Devices to ensure that we're taking a very consistent and risk-based approach overall as an agency to these things. Quickly touch on identifying combination product applications. There was a law signed in 2016 that requires an applicant to identify that they're submitting a combination product to the agency. And that's important because it helps us on the intake to know that we have a combination product and to know that we need to take special action with it. And so for CDER and CBER, we instituted that through the 356H and the 1571 forms. If you've submitted an application to the agency before using one of these forms, you're familiar with it, but it's essentially the the required form for submissions to CDER or CBER. And it now has a category for identifying a combination product. CDRH has taken a little bit of a different approach, but they've put that in their refuse to accept guidelines so that upon receipt of that submission, they are checking to ensure that it has been appropriately identified as a combination product. Now, moving on, Intercenter consultation. We can't review a combination product in CDER without working with our colleagues in CDRH and vice versa. And so the centers are constantly communicating back and forth about a combination product submission that's in front of them, trying to make sure that they're leveraging the subject matter expertise for that constituent part within the review of the context of the whole combination product. And so we undertook a few years ago to revise and update our internal processes to be sure that we're working as best and most efficiently as we can in review of those combination products so that we can get you the questions or the answers that you need to the questions you have on those. There's a staff manual guide that was recently updated that speaks to that. And because combination products are being identified by the applicants now, and because we've done all these processes, the reviewers are even more aware of combination product issues and are able to trigger some of those consults more quickly when they need to. They give us the ability to request specific input and expertise when we need it. And this is done throughout the product life cycle. We're not just talking about the pre-market phase or those early interactions that you might be having or during the application review process, but going into the post-market phase as well. The other important thing is that the lead center for your combination product is always going to be your primary point of contact, the primary facilitator. So even if you have a question for the agency about a device constituent part of your combination product that is under an NDA review or currently in a review phase, you are going to be asking CDER that question, and CDER is going to work to get that question over to CDRH through the Intercenter consult process, and vice versa. Same thing with CDRH. So your lead center is always your primary point of contact. And this is just a visual to show you what I'm talking about in terms of Intercenter consults. I said we do them a lot. Over the last 5 years, well, this only goes up to fiscal year 2017, so we don't even have the most recent fiscal year on here. Combination product consults have increased 55%. So in 2017, there were almost 1,500 Intercenter consults sent between the centers. And you can see that CDER by far sends more consults to CDRH because of the number of drug delivery devices that we have in our center. But each center sends consults back and forth on a daily, weekly, multiple times a day basis. So what are some other general considerations in thinking about combination products and what you need to do? Sadly, there is no single developmental paradigm. There's not a one-size-fits-all approach. The types of combination products are so vastly different, as I mentioned in the very beginning, from your drug-eluting stent to your auto-injector with a drug to your laser light source that's photoactivating a drug, that you can't apply the exact same developmental paradigm to each of those. But the broad strokes that we gave you are what you should follow. Sometimes you can use existing guidance for a single constituent part, but that's a starting point because you can't just consider the device piece or just the drug piece in a silo. You have to think about the overall combination product and where those two pieces come together. So you do need to address the product as a whole in addition to looking at the individual constituents. And unfortunately, while there are a lot of guidance documents about combination products in general, there's very few that are product specific. And so there is one about drug-eluting stents that's been in draft for a while. And then there is one about pen injectors. And there's a few others that are, maybe in the works, but most things are more general broad strokes combination product guidance that exist, not product specific. You can use right to reference or authorizations to reference DMFs and MAFs. Those are the drug and device master files that exist. This allows you to submit proprietary information. So if you're making a combination product and you want to keep your, and the device firm that you're working with wants to keep some information proprietary, they can submit that through a master file. And then you as the drug sponsor are able to reference that so that we can rely on that information in review of the overall combination product, but you don't have to share that proprietary information if you don't necessarily want to. there can be outstanding drug or device issues. And what I mean by that gets a little bit complicated, but it's essentially those times when there is a device that wants to have a new and novel way of delivering a drug, but the drug just actually hasn't been approved for that indications for use. And so there are some times where there are outstanding issues that need to be addressed. And the other important thing to remember is that there's only one investigational application for a combination product. You don't need an IND and an IDE to investigate a combination product through a clinical study. You should only have one investigational application, and it should be with the lead center. And so there's a few regulatory challenges that still exist today. There's still diverse regulatory considerations for the drugs, the devices, and the biologics in their own regulatory paradigm. But when you combine those together, we have to think about what the pre-market expectations are for those new combination products. And so recent guidance has come out in draft. I believe we'll be working to get that out in final over the coming months about the pre-market expectations, the principles of how we regulate those combination products. The regulatory and scientific approach, as I mentioned, isn't the same for a single entity as it is for combination products. You have to take into consideration the product as a whole. Even though we've been doing this for a number of years, we still have learning curves. Y'all are making new and innovative products, and every time we see one of those, we have to say, oh, okay, can we fit this into what we're doing, or do we have to develop something a little bit different, work in a different way in order to get this new and innovative product to market? We work on leveraging available information and ensuring that the appropriate preclinical testing and clinical trial design is done. And we still have some jurisdiction questions. That's why the Office of Combination Products still exists and still is doing the pre-RFDs and RFDs. So now that you are a seasoned traveler, we hope that you can go back and take some time to work through this next section of the slides by yourself. What you can do on your own time is look through this case study that we put together specific to the drug-eluting stents, and it walks you through some various considerations about how you would approach the device and the drug considerations separately and then together. And so hopefully you'll be able to see that working through that there is no single developmental paradigm. There's not a one-size-fits-all approach to combination products. You need to consider the combination product as a whole. You should now be able to, though, identify what is and is not a combination product, so you can think about that as you're developing your product. And we hope that you have taken away some best practices for combination products in navigating the FDA. And so now I think I get to turn it over to Elias and open it to questions.
Questions. We had quite a few number of questions that came in online, so we'll go all the way until about 10 o'clock, and then we'll break at that point. So if you do have a question in the audience, please come to one of these microphones. We ask that you speak kind of close to the mic and slowly and clearly so we can pick up the audio. So to kick us off, I'm going to send it down to Ray, who's from CDER, and he's going to be managing the online questions for us this morning. So Ray, can you send us the first question we have? I know you're speechless.
There we go. If constituent parts of a combination product are manufactured in separate facilities, do I follow GMPs or QS in those facilities?
So I'll do my best at that. So if your constituent part is manufactured at a separate facility, then that facility would, for all intents and purposes, be obligated to follow their respective systems. So if the drug is being manufactured separately, that facility would abide by the GMPs, or if the device, the QSRs. Ultimately, when those constituent parts are combined is when the Part 4 requirements kick in. So that is when you technically have a combination product. Again, there's some nuances to this, but just as a general rule of thumb, if you're manufacturing the constituent parts separately, each manufacturing site would be responsible for their respective manufacturing processes, and the final combination product manufacturer combining would then have the obligations of the Part 4. That being said, to fulfill the Part 4 obligations, they may rely on the processes each of the constituent part manufacturers have, but ultimately that would need to be accounted for when they are combined.
James? We'll take a question from the audience over here in this mic.
Hi, thank you. Those are great presentations. Much appreciated. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the criteria used to decide when two separate applications are required?
So I wouldn't say there is a set standard for criteria. There's a lot of considerations that we will take into account when two separate applications may be appropriate for a combination product. And some of those have to do with maybe the novelty of the product, whether we're looking at an NME, a new molecular entity for the drug. There are various considerations that we would think about in determining whether one or two applications may be an appropriate pathway for a combination product. If you want to add anything.
And then, no, well, just a very little bit. Probably also, again, the choice, some of the examples have been historically chosen by firms to submit separate applications. So I think that's then the flip side to your question is, when would a single application be appropriate as compared to two separate? So it's sort of, as Chrissy mentioned, a little case by case, and we sort of look at the nuances of the product and the constituent parts in front of us to sort of elucidate that. If you have questions regarding that, I'd recommend you engage early with us, and we would hopefully be able to clarify that in a relatively timely manner.
Is there a database where marketing approvals for combination products are listed?
So for CDRH, there's a little flag for each of the 510K, De Novo, and PMA databases, and there's a combo product flag. So you can run your own search by clicking on that and seeing what combination products have been approved, cleared, granted, et cetera, at least in CDRH.
Unfortunately, CDER doesn't have quite as nice system as CDRH has in identifying those combination product submissions. That is something that is on our agenda of things to work on. But there is a way to look at combination products, or to look at whether or not, because we do get that information through things like registration and listing. And the SPL labeling that's used for prescription drug products does capture that information. So for example, if you are going into Daily Med and looking at the approved product there, way down in that listing, there's a flag that identifies it as a combination product. There's just not a great way to search and pull all those up in a public database at this time.
And obviously, if you have any questions and you can't gather or garner the information from the databases, then obviously please reach out to ourselves, OCP if necessary. But oftentimes we will receive inquiries just as a first step of, hey, James, what do you think? And I give my opinion, or if my opinion is I really don't know, this is a tough one, you really need to talk to OCP. But we can try and do that as quickly and as informally as possible.
All right, thank you. Let's take one question from the online audience. Ray?
This one is addressed to Kristina. How do cell therapies fit into combination products? For example, a device that delivers cells to the patient. Are cell therapies in CDER?
No, cell therapy, cellular-based therapeutics, pretty much everything that involves a live cell is regulated in the Center for Biologics. I am not aware of any that are just live cell therapies alone that are regulated in CDER. Potentially, if we saw an investigational application and we thought that there was, a need to have that in CDER because of some additional drug constituent part, we might consider assigning something like that. But to my knowledge, all of them are currently evaluated in the Center for Biologics. Anything with a living cell.
All right, let's go to the far mic again.
Hi, Aruna, Pharma Pro Consulting. My question is that if there is a drug which is approved and there is a device which is also approved, and the client, in this case, the sponsor is looking for combining the drug with the device, what category will that get into? Because we already know the individual safety of both independently, but we are just looking to combine the two.
I'll take first stab at that. So I think it depends on what you're saying combined. It could be just putting it into a kit. That's combining. Then I think there would be, the agency is always looking at, when appropriate, to leverage our historical knowledge of the products. So that being said, and a point that we've sort of dwelled on through the presentation has been, you can't just consider them in isolation. You then have to consider them together. And that goes a little bit to my point of, is it a kit, or are you looking now to physically, chemically combine them, pre-fill them, something like that. So that within that context, there's a spectrum of what we may sort of articulate as what's needed, looking at the delta, what's different from those approved separate constituents to now this combined entity. So I think first question would be, from pathway perspective, if it's drug-led, I will defer to Kristy. From a device lead, I think the pathway will ultimately be, again, determined on how far off it is from the individual constituent parts.
So my question is more so like, if it is combined and it is like put into the human body, not like, a kit.
So if it's what we call a single entity combination product, for example, like the drug-eluting stent, where they're not easily separable. Yeah, so then the types of things that James was mentioning would kick in, is looking at the difference. What do we know about the two things individually? But then when you combine them, for example, with the drug-eluting stent, we know what the standards are for the stent. I'm going to use the wrong device terms here, but bear with me because I'm not a device person anymore. But when the stent will break based on the pressures applied to it. The question then would be, how different are those pressures when you've got a drug coating on it? Are they the same? And so you need to consider both what you know about the individual thing, but then what else do you want to verify when you put them together? The same with a syringe. We know what a syringe does when it's sold in a kit with the drug next to it, and you pre-fill it and use it right away. There's not a lot of concern about that. However, when you are storing it pre-filled, are there things leaching out of the syringe into the drug over the extended storage time? Does something change when you are now over-sterilizing the two things combined together as what you did separately? So all of those things need to be taken into consideration, and probably many others that I can't think of off the top of my head.
And I would just add, though, also to the extent that the indications for the product. So if your drug A is approved for sub-Q injection for MS, and now you're looking, going back to drug-eluting stent, you're now looking for a cardiovascular pathology, and you have systemic more systemic exposure. Those, again, looking at the delta and how those differ from what's
Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for a couple more questions. We'll take one more from the in-house audience.
An area that I didn't hear any discussion on, but I'd like some input on, is pre-approval inspections for combination products, especially when sometimes you end up with 2 483s, 2 EIRs, and your lead group may not be the division that you're in. It may be CDRH that has the issue with the manufacturing of the device. How is that handled, and is there any guidance or any changes with the change in ORA? We'll be seeing 2 SMEs coming out on a combination product for pre-approval.
Unfortunately, I don't think either of us can speak in depth to answer that question. There is a lot of work being done about inspections for, including pre-approval inspections for combination products, to ensure that we're being as efficient as we can in looking at those and being as clear as we can in what the deficiencies are that we might be needing to share with you based on those pre-approval inspections. I can't answer specifically about getting 2 or 1. I can tell you that it's still working through the lead center if you have concerns about how, what's been going on with that pre-approval inspection, questions about how to work through those things can be handled through the lead center.
The only thing I would add is ultimately we're looking to ensure that there's a safe and effective product while managing our resources, and but also making sure we can be as clear to the stakeholder, the sponsor, in the process as possible. In other words, if based on the constituent parts, we just believe there's enough history and we don't believe, say there's a pre-approval inspection from the device side of the combination products, we would look to clarify that as soon as possible so you aren't left wondering until the last minute, do we need to prepare for inspection?
So the other thing I'll add too is internally we're working on the processes for when we do need to reach out to, you know, if it's a CDER-led product, to reach out to CDRH and make sure that we're leveraging the device inspection subject matter expertise in that review, or when it's needed and when it's not.
Just as a follow-up question, because this is just something that happened recently, the lead center will be doing the scheduling of the PAIs, or will it be coming from both parties? They will get a schedule from CDRH and from CDER.
I think it may, I would say that's maybe the general rule of thumb, but I think it depends on who's determined to be necessary for the inspection. Yeah. So in other words, if it's a CDER-led, but this is a hypothetical, but CDER has decided that they don't need to inspect from the drug constituent side of things, then that may be coordinated more or directed more from the CDRH. But again,
we do have presentations coming up from both a drug investigator and device investigator. I think that might be a great question to hold off, and if you don't hear the answer during those talks, we can bring that back up.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. We have time for a very quick question and a very brief answer. Hint, hint. So Ray, we'll take one more from online.
Should the storage conditions and shelf life be based on the device or the drug in a combination product?
It should be based on whichever has the shorter of the shelf life conditions. So if you have a device that's good for a year, but the drug is only going to be good for 2 months, it needs to be based on that shorter time period. Short
right.
enough for you?
Elias, can we get one more?
We don't have time for one more. We'll have to hold that one for the end of the day. So this does wrap up the Q&A session this morning. Thank you all for joining us. I'd like to turn it back to our esteemed panelists for their final thoughts for you this morning.
And thank you for your time. Final thoughts. Yeah, I think you've now heard this ad nauseum, but it just can't stress enough that there is no single developmental paradigm, not one size fits all for all combination products. While there is consistency and we look to leverage previous experiences, there's always a little bit of a nuance. So we recommend you engage with us. Again, work with the FDA early in the developmental process if determined to be appropriate, and particularly if there's thoughts of questions of jurisdiction and classification, both from my own bias on the device side as well as from the combo product drug biologic device aspect. Ensure that, while we don't have many that apply to combination products, we do have many that apply to the constituent parts and the pathways respectively. So make sure to review all applicable guidance documents. And great question from the audience regarding the combining. Look to leverage available and existing data for the constituent parts while taking into consideration the product as a whole. How big is the delta? What is the delta? Is there a delta? Look at that. And then again, can't hammer it enough, early interactions, particularly on combination products, to make sure all the appropriate parties are at the table and the agency and sponsor are working hand in hand. Some additional resources and a number of references and guidance documents discussed during our presentation, and obviously abbreviations